see you guys in the dark.
My old roommate's dad was a former naval officer and then an FBI agent. 20 years in the Navy and 12 to 15 years or so in the FBI. One of his strangest stories was from his FBI days. There was a kidnapping case. This girl had disappeared from her grandparents' RV sometime between 5 p.m. and midnight. They were up front. Next thing you know, she's gone. She was supposed to be sleeping in the back. One stop at the rest stop, and they were in stop-and-go traffic, so they figured that she must have popped out the door at some point. This is near the California-Nevada border, so we had met them, talked to them. This is within about a day or so, and the girl happens to still be missing. There's no sign of her. She happened to be 15. Local PD theory is she ran off because she's 15 and wants to get away from her lame grandparents for the summer. But there's a busted window, glass inside the vehicle, so we're treating it like a possible kidnapped person. After a few hours, there's a couple different theories on this case. One is that she ran off, another that she got snatched. Nobody's seen the girl in almost 2 days now, and disappearing in the desert for a young girl is pretty tough. Next thing you know, we get a cell phone call. Naked girl, lost and confused, picked up by some trucker on a 2-lane road out there called Nipton. Runs into I-15 between Barstow and Vegas somewhere, right near the border. Matches the description. Me and the 3 other guys head out there to meet with the sheriff who's got her. Turns out she's the girl. She's just fine. There's no bruises, no exposure, no nothing. Completely healthy, completely fine, even cleaned like she took a shower. Won't tell us a damn thing. Doesn't remember anything either. According to her, 1 minute she's in the RV, the next she's naked walking down the side of the road in 100-degree heat. We talked to her for about 2 hours while her grandparents headed out to go pick her up. Had our social services lady talk to her. Nothing. I've seen people hiding things. She definitely wasn't hiding anything. She honestly didn't remember. The damnedest thing, the girl was found. She was fine. So he turned it back over to the local PD to figure out what had happened and determine if charges were pressed at all. I kept in touch with a guy that I knew there because I was curious, and we were in a fantasy football league. A few months later, he tells me the parents sent the girl to a therapist to look for repressed memories, to make sure that she wasn't raped or something. The therapist says that she seems pretty fine, but honestly has no recollection of her time at all, and doesn't think that there's any point in delving much further, since she has no symptoms, and is largely more confused by the reaction than the event. So to this day, we've got a busted RV window with glass on the inside, likely from a moving RV on a jam-packed freeway, likely in broad or lightly faded sunlight, with 0 witnesses. A 15-year-old girl gets out, or happens to be taken out, and is taken somewhere safe nearby for almost 2 days, and then is stripped naked without being touched, cleaned up, and deposited on the side of a separate road a few miles away. She didn't have a drug in her system that we could detect. She remembers nothing at all. Nobody knows what happened to her clothes or anything. It's been almost 20 years since this has happened. Can't figure out what the hell went on with that girl. It still bugs me at night that I have no way to explain it aside from she lied this whole time. But I know liars, and I'd bet money that she wasn't lying at all. The creepiest thing was when I was walking a beat on a solo foot post late one night. This was back in my first year on the job. My partner was on meal break, so it left me on the post by myself for the next hour until he got back. I decided to walk down from the north of my post to the south, past a few abandoned lots. As I passed one of them, I thought I saw something at the end of the lot by my face line. Lots of times people using or just being vagrants will be in these lots. I shined my flashlight in the area. Nothing was there. Trick of the low lighting in the area. No big deal. As I turned away, the fence on the far side of the lot rattled, giving that distinctive chain sound. I stopped and looked back. Already thinking of how ridiculous this feels, I put my light on there once again. Standing there was a man. He didn't look homeless, nor did he look like the kind of guy that hangs out in lots late at night. I asked him what he was doing. He just simply stood there, not really looking at me, but kind of above me. I asked again. There was no answer. I told him to come over here, as he shouldn't be in that lot. He just stood there. I decided to put it over the radio before approaching him. Post 4 Central. Show me one male stopped at this street. Back lot. No further. No emergency. So I walked into the lot, but I have to hop a small fence to get to where he is standing. I figured this guy must be tweaking out or something. He looks like he has no idea where he is. I hopped the fence. I looked back up, and this dude was gone. I took my eyes off of him for 2 seconds, and then he was gone. No sound from the far fence chain. Nothing. I scanned the entire lot, wondering where this guy had gone. Looked behind the only real cover, a dumpster, and inside of it, he wasn't there. Central raised me a minute later and asked the status. 1091, 98, non-crime corrected, resuming patrol. To this day, I think I happened to see a ghost. As crazy as that sounds, I've never told anybody about what happened that night. Definitely some crazy stuff. I know there's a chance that maybe he just hopped the fence without me hearing it, and then suddenly took off. But in the amount of time that it took me to hop a 4-foot fence, that's highly unlikely. We have this tow impound facility we contract through in our city. After a lot of accidents where the people have died inside the wreckage, the vehicles are brought to this place for the bodies to be cut out of the view of the public. Additionally, a lot of bad wrecks where people have died are brought here. All of them, actually. Pretty much every single person on the staff at this place says that it is haunted. One of our forensic technicians will not go there alone when they have to process a vehicle. They basically told me that one time they were there, and they said that there was somebody sitting in one of the cars. That was part of a fatal accident, by the way. The technician went to get an employee. When they returned, the car happened to be empty. This is a locked-down, secure warehouse with only one way in. Being interested, I started to ask the employees more about it every time I had to go there. One time, the guy that worked there shows me a video of myself walking around, and I guess what you would call an orb flying through the air where I was. It's very hard to describe. It was a very stark and unusual image on the surveillance footage. Other than that incident, a decade-old light bulb turned on at the attic that hadn't been used at all. The guy called thinking somebody had actually broken into his attic. It was so strange to him. To make it a little creepier, he just put some dead people's clothing right beneath the attic. And then there's a motion detector for alarms at the houses that just go off in the middle of the night, with no fans on, no air movement whatsoever. I've been to so many damn alarms. I have a pretty good understanding of how they work, but there were probably 3 or 4 that had just had no explanation whatsoever. Not exactly the most exciting stories, but I think it is the reality of what most police officers actually encounter during their shifts. Warning, this story is very disturbing. I live in a fairly small town. My dad was a cop for 10 years or so. My aunt had worked in the ER going on 11 years now. At the time of the story, one of my best friend's brother-in-law was an EMT. They are all involved in this sick tale. There was a call about a domestic dispute, then a 911 call from the same address, from a woman who was just screaming, and then cut off. Of course, they sent all available units immediately. After a few officers had shown up, they reported the situation back, and the chief decided no female officers or EMTs should be allowed near the scene. It turned out a Hispanic man was on drugs, had a freak out on his girlfriend, accusing her of cheating. He beat the shit out of her, broke several of her bones. He decided their 3-month-old baby wasn't his, picked up the infant by his feet, and then used a box cutter on him. When the cops had shown up, He was beating on his girlfriend with a kitchen utensil while she huddled over the baby, trying to shield him with her own body. They got him subdued, rushed the baby to the ER, tended to the wife in the ambulance out front, and sewed up several cuts of the man in the kitchen. The EMT tending to him was my friend's brother-in-law. The man was still high, but coming down, saying a lot of disgusting things about his girlfriend. The EMT slammed his head into the refrigerator, warning him to stop talking. A sergeant happened to be in the room, saw this, and gave the EMT an approval nod. A few minutes later, the sergeant got fed up with the man's clearly unapologetic words, and said, "Do you hear that woman crying? She trusted you to take care of her, loved you enough to give you a son, and look what you have done to them. She didn't cheat. You never let her leave the house, so how could she? That little boy is your son. You could have been a father to him and raised him to be a great man. Now you've taken that child's life. That woman, who loved you so much, is out there weeping because she has lost her son and her boyfriend. Don't you care at all?" The man then said that if the baby didn't want him to kill it, then it should have died before it was born, and that the woman deserved it because she was a dumb bitch, cheating or not. The sergeant just shot the guy in the foot. My father witnessed all of this, and later had to testify. My aunt said in the ER the baby was laying there. Everything was just laying there next to him on the gurney, outside of his body. Every single person who worked on that baby requested therapy afterwards. The mom had some pretty bad internal bleeding, but my aunt said the most disturbing thing was hearing her scream for her baby. She said in all her years in the ER, she's never heard anyone scream like that. The mom and the baby actually both lived, but the baby had some serious brain damage because he didn't get enough oxygen to the brain because of a punctured lung. The man is in prison. I know he got drug charges, weapon charges. Unregistered guns were found in the home as well as more drugs. Domestic battery, attempted murder, and a few other things that I'm not sure of. I do know that he has no possibility of parole, and a long sentence, but I'm not sure exactly how long that turned out to be. The sergeant and the EMT were both fired. That happened to be the hearing that my dad had to testify in, among other officers and EMTs. I've had a few creepy moments in my career, but one that has always stood out to me was a call that I had when I worked midnight shift. It was around 2 a.m. in the dead of winter, bone cold that night. I got a call from dispatch that said that they had an open 911 call and could hear a woman moaning, "Help me," and then suddenly silence. My partner and I arrived at the apartment to find the door slightly cracked open and had a blood smear on it. The apartment was black inside and strangely pretty quiet. We had made an entry. It was like something out of a horror movie. The first thing we noticed was a large arterial spray on the wall that seemed to smear down to a hallway and disappeared towards the back of the apartment. As we made our way down the hall, blood was smeared down the wall on the bedroom. Blood covered the door handle. We opened up the door, saw a lifeless body on a bed, covered all in blood. Unbelievably creepy. It was dead silent, still in that apartment. We had checked the body, found a faint pulse. The woman was still alive. Turned out she was blind and had other health problems. She had a shunt in her arm, which she had managed to pull out, by mistake we found out later, and she started bleeding out everywhere. For those curious, she did live, though that was 8 years ago. I still remember the creepy, quiet, and staleness of the apartment and the bitter cold. This one time, I went on a call on a suspicious person at a house that was near where I was at. When I get there, the guy tells me that someone knocked on his door. When he went to go see who it was, there was a woman standing in his driveway with some sort of child-sized doll with horns. It looked like it was all bloody and cut up. So he asked the woman, who was looking away from him, what she wanted. She turned around and told him that it needs food, then started screaming at the top of her lungs and ran at him. So like a normal human being, he slammed the door in her face and then called the cops. I get there, and there are well-defined claw marks on this door. There's also a good bit of blood, I suppose from her fingers. So I call it out and start the search on foot. I also had 2 or 3 units driving around the area to see if they can't find this lady. So I'm about a block away. We get another phone call that the woman is back at the guy's house, but in the backyard this time. So I ran about a block back to the guy's house, bust into his backyard. The lights are out, so I have my flashlight out. I'm looking around. I see the lady huddled in the corner next to an evil-looking doll. I ask her if she's okay. She doesn't say anything to me. About this time, one of my mobile units came back to the house, parked his unit where the headlights were shining on her so that we could see how scary this lady actually looked. She had long black hair. Her clothes were rags. She had no shoes on. Clearly, she was homeless. She kept whispering things to the doll. So my buddy and I approached. We tried talking to her. She just kept on whispering to the doll. We couldn't understand what the hell she was saying, so we decided to drag her out of there. The second we put our hands on this lady, she goes berserk, punching, kicking, slapping, all kinds of stuff. So we're fighting with her, trying to get her on the ground. She's not going down. This lady was strong as hell. Well, in the fight, she somehow got away from us and was sitting in a crouched position with her head tilted to the side and making the creepiest growling, snarling noise that I have ever heard. Then she screams at the top of her lungs and charges right at us. So my buddy straight up jabbed her in the face and knocked her clean out. We cuffed her and hauled her off to the hospital where she tested positive for PCP and various opiates. She was charged with battery of a police officer, resisting arrest, and trespassing. Later, she was institutionalized for some sort of mental disorder. Not sure quite what it was. My department didn't have anything more to do with her after her booking into the jail cell.